I just want to set the stage of this discussion. I think we're having at a time where you have a lot of hunger in the world, but especially in Africa. Just to give one indicator, 1 out of African is hungry or malnourished. Therefore, a discussion on food availability is an important one. And GMO is really a prop, among other approaches, as a technology to help produce sufficient and high quality food. Now, as you mentioned earlier, it's not the only approach. So it's one of the approach. It's driven by technology, by innovation. And that I will attempt my first definition of GMO. And it's actually a living organism whose DNA has been manipulated by biotechnology in order to acquire certain property or certain trait that it cannot get naturally. Now I'm sure Catherine will deal more around that. But the point I want to make here, and the difference between the usual, the GMO and what is called the transgenic, is in the transgenic, the DNA that is introduced in order to give the trait may come from a different species. So basically crossing species. Now, this is an important, and one of the point is this is done with the view of increasing, enhancing production, productivities, and the quality of food. Now, taken together, that makes the point extremely important. But to the point you made also, there are a lot of concern around it, partly because people don't really understand it, but I also think that there is a crisis in trust. And I think this is why I welcome this discussion. And as a community and common sense approach, I listen to views, all the views. I assess the pro and the cons, but also I put it in context because I don't believe in blueprint. I think there are unique solutions in specific context to specific challenges. So that would be my starting introduction. Catherine is a researcher, and I appreciate the question she's taking. But let me take a more daring stand on here. One of the data point is 70% of global production of soy is GMO. Now, soy is what farmers use to feed their animals, chicken and cow. Given the fact that most African countries are net importers of food, I think one can reasonably conclude that whether we know it or not, we have consumed GMO. And we are alive. I want to add that. I mean, we are not sick, we are healthy. Because of the nature of the global economy, it's really very, very difficult to insulate yourself from this big trend. I mean, and we'll get back to that. I mean, there are some countries that need food so badly that they will take it from wherever it comes. But as I think the thing we should do say now, the evidence, I mean, many research have been done globally. There is no convincing research that show that GM food is more dangerous or has present more health hazard than any other food grown conventionally. The evidence is not there. There is substitution. There are some concerns that should be taken very carefully. And to the point that Catherine is talking about, there is a whole legislation that accompany the production and commercialization of GMO. And I can say, there is a Cartagena Convention, I mean, that Catherine can speak about, which basically define really the significance of GMO and its potential of contributing to solving issue of food security and even environmental sustainability. And I can say that 48 African countries have actually subscribed to those conventions. Mm-hmm. Now, it also set very clear measure from a policy and regulatory point of view that really should provide the framework for doing research and producing those GMO. And to the point Catherine was talking about earlier, I think South Africa has a very strong legislation around that. But countries like Kenya, Egypt, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, many other countries are actually setting in place the legislative framework that enable them to explore that technology. I think irrespective of our personal preferences, it will be unheard of African scientists to say, I forego a technology because I don't know about it. I think that's not an option for us. We should study it, know it, but any decision pertaining to GMO should be carefully considered looking at the data but also looking at the potential impact on people health, on environment, also on the economy. Firstly, I want to start with the good news. GMO is actually being used in medicine. All the transgenic animal produce drugs, the organ transplant from animals to human. I think we are all familiar of that. The vaccine being produced with our shots, the production of molecules, insulin, growth hormone, etc. So there are clear application of GMO technology to enhance our health on one hand. Secondly, there are some concern, and I think they basically, part of them, and they are legitimate, that should be considered, is because it's unknown. When you are in an era of unknown, especially when you are doing this transgenic transfer of genes, there are many questions as to whether it may be harmful to health, to human health. I have to say, I checked the literature, I listened to many experts. There seems to be no evidence, that show that you have more in GMO food than any other food. So that's what the science and the evidence is telling us. Now, because there are cases where, like the use of certain insecticide, like the Roundups, and what happened to it once it goes through the food cycle and come into our human bodies, there are some question marks as to whether it can be potentially hazardous. Again, this has to be, it's an empirical question, and to the point Catherine was saying, we should look at the data, all the clinical trial across the world, and I haven't seen convincing evidence that this is something that is fully established, and therefore should be worth banning the benefit or foregoing the benefit of GMO, not only on health, but also on environmental sustainability. Because of the fact that we are generating resistant seeds and plants to certain of these diseases, etc., imply that there is less use of insecticide, fertilizers, etc., which therefore can contribute to more sustainable environment, healthier environment. But the cons can be also made. There are arguments against, and I think all of them should be considered for their merit based on the data and the view that the consumers may have after consuming these products. I want to highlight four things. Firstly, there are clear instances where the use of GMO, especially in the golden rice, can enrich vitamin A, and therefore limiting the risk of blindness in malnourished children. There are some perspective of really drug production using GMOs. GMO allows also to eliminate the presence of some naturally occurring toxic component in food, especially the cyanide in cassava. So I think it's really, this is why I'm saying we should look at the pro and the cons. To the point she's making, everything should be strictly regulated and tested before we move. But I want to give you a very concrete case of countries where the magnitude of hunger and poverty is so big that this discussion would be almost like unreal. Let me just give you a few examples. In a country, and that's data from FAO, that can be checked. A country like South Sudan, according to FAO, 6.5 million people suffer from acute food insecurity. In Burundi, 65% of the population is affected by food insecurity. Eritrea, 44% is faced with food insecurity. So the point I'm making is there is not really a choice between having an potentially unhealthy food or dying of hunger. So
I
we
think
definitely,
we
so
definitely
basically we
balance.
need to explore, and I think exploring all the safe options, embracing all the technological options that are at our disposal, using the regulatory and the policy framework that enable to ensure safety, to provide food to all.
Yeah.
So the biggest risk is not so much to get some indigestion because you ate something. For some people, the option is whether they eat or they don't eat. And I'm not saying—
Maybe you could help bring out that point. For me, it's not clear the line between having GMO, because we haven't gotten to the question about productivity or yields or what it is GMO really delivers. So there's 2 points here. So one is to close the last question. So really what I'm hearing from both of you is, yes, indeed, for GMO and non-GMO food, it is critical that we make sure what we're putting on people's plates is safe. So that need for regulation is not even just a GMO issue, it's generally a concern of food safety. So we're in agreement on that. I think where I think people would like to know more is, when you say that it's against hunger versus something else, how does GMO help with that hunger problem? Why is it an urgent issue for some?
Okay. Firstly, I think it's an urgent issue for Africa to sustainably increase its production. I'm not necessarily saying it has to be GMO. It's not a silver bullet. All option, because of the diversities of our production system. I said earlier, there is really no silver bullet. So each country, depending on the context, should find ways, typically technology, institution, and policy reform and innovation that enable the country to enhance production and productivities. It's important to have sufficient infrastructure to manage post-harvest losses and to make sure that people can access and afford the food. That's generally, and I think because of, I started my talk by saying, because we are in a context of hunger and malnutrition, some of these discussions may look like they are superficial. When somebody's hungry, they will eat anything they have. So I think the real problem we need to deal, so that we are not in a GMO or non-GMO, is how do we make sure that we increase food production, we enhance our productivities. And I mean, to the layman, to increase production, I have colleagues at Agra who used to say, good seeds, good soil, good agronomic practices. Now you have to add water. Those are the base. Seed is one of the elements, irrespective of what type of seed. So you have all the factors that needs to be combined in order to enhance production and productivity. I think because of a limited number of players, private sector player controlling the seed, then create an economic dependency that can be really problematic. We've seen with COVID-19, when the supply chain broke down, how it was clear that we needed to build short circuits, the market system. The scenario, one can therefore, but it doesn't have to be that way. If the technology is warranted, there should be a possibility to have an ecosystem that is more diversified, where you have locally grown seed or research institution generating technology that are adapted to specific geography, and therefore you have a shorter circuit of exchange. Because unfortunately, what you are in a situation where the way the market works is what they call mean variance trade-off. You have a small number of people who can produce a lot, a larger number of people who have very little. And obviously that's not sustainable for Africa. Probably it's better to have smaller gain achieved by a larger number of people than having huge gain achieved by few. I think this is where I think the issue of maintaining a very vibrant and localized ecosystem is crucial in enhancing our agriculture and food system. It's not only the farmer buying seed, it's also the consumer buying food. So from the point of view of the consumer, they have to have access to a healthy, cheap food. If you're a farmer, so depending on how you produce, what kind of technology you use, your cost of production, therefore, the price at which you can deliver the product to the consumer will be very different. Unless the country, you close the border, which we know is a recipe for disaster. So it's a very complex matter where we really need to manage both the surplus of the consumers. Ultimately, even farmers are consumers. So there is no alternative, and I'm not saying that you have to have GM seed. You just need to have increased productivity so that you can produce more with less. Therefore, you can put at the disposal of the consumers high quality food at a low cost. And unfortunately, this is where we cannot compete with countries that have a productivity of a factor of 100 versus 1. I mean, if you are getting your product from Brazil or Argentina or the US, clearly you cannot compare with your farmer who is using their tribe, So we need to address the issue of uptake of new technology by our farmers. It shouldn't be either or. I think we should deal straight heads on with the issue of safety to make sure that all safe technologies are accessible to enable our farmers to be able to produce and be competitive, because otherwise they are not part of wealth creation. Your own consumer will go for the other products.